podium over to Hector Geffner.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to hear in this part three talks. Two serious talks by top researchers and the third one by me. Okay, I'll talk about from the perspective of a student of Judea and a card-carrying member of the Club of Fans of Judea. Okay, so even though, can you hear me from the back? For the video. Okay, so what I do with this? Okay, 1 second. Rina, now if you have to stand next to me. Like here. That should work. Okay, so the title, Judah's Approach to AI, is supposed to have two meanings. Okay, on the one hand, I'm going to talk about what is the approach in AI that is normally these days identified with Judah. And on the other hand, my experience. Okay, you have to turn it on too? Okay, there is a light here.
You have to speak up also. It's mostly for the videotape, so.
Yeah, but what do I do now? I didn't take this class with Judah. I'm not good with gadgets. I'm a theoretician. Is it okay? Okay, so I'll speak in stereo. Okay, is it better now? Looks the same to me. I want to move around. Okay, I'll speak next to the microphone. It looks too formal here. If you can see, I'm not wearing a tie like Adnan, and I cannot stay in the same place.
Move to the other side.
Okay. Okay, so I'll talk about Judah's approach, how he entered into AI as was a student of Judah. Actually, many years ago, in the 80s, so a long time ago, a few years, so a quarter of a century ago, when we were younger, prettier, and thinner. You are as pretty, actually, you even prettier now. But at this time, I was doing my PhD. I think Adnan was also doing the PhD. Rich had finished his PhD by this point. I was his TA. We had a few fights then. And of course, Rina had not been born yet. And so actually, I came to UCLA in '83 to do a master's in control theory in the systems science department. But I was already interested in AI, and it's quite natural that for me to take a class with Judah. So I took the class with Judah and joined his group just right after the class and enrolled in the PhD program. Well, it's finished like 5 years later in '89. So if I have to say, so what attracted to me to Judah at that time? So I probably don't think that was the science or Judah's work, because I couldn't tell it apart from other work in AI. So I was a beginner, complete beginner. I was probably was Judah's popularity at that time either. Actually, at that time, so in AI, there were more popular approaches, more sexy approaches. And if you approach the Judah's cognitive lab at that time, you open the door of the cognitive systems lab, and this, if I may say, was pretty empty. There was nothing there. Actually, a secretary at that time, whose main job was to transcribe Judah's handwriting into Tirov. Okay, so on the other hand, there was, at the time I was here, so the AI lab that has very fancy workstations, many people and so on, while Judah was typing with the 2 fingers in a WISE 50 terminal at that time. So definitely was not, the size was not the popularity, but I think it was Judah, okay? It was Judah's personality. Just as Adnan and Rina said, Judah was a wonderful person, was very nice to talk to him. He was very intelligent, humble, conveying a lot of excitement about what he was doing. And I think that he was, this excitement coming from a passion. He had to understand. Judah's understanding is not just something, one more activity. He has the duty, he has to understand. It's a personal affair. It's something, as he used to say, the burning questions. I mean, what are the questions? I was going to ask me, so what are the burning questions that prevent you from sleeping? At that time, I didn't have those questions. I could sleep very well. Maybe now I could answer that. But, okay, so Judah really this completely uncorrupted passion for understanding. That's probably some of the authors of the books in that table, okay? That attitude towards science. So you may say, to understand what? And I tend to think that what Judah has been trying to understand is basically how the mind works, okay? So Judah has been a cognitive scientist so we have heard that Judah has been a computer scientist, a philosopher, and we didn't hear linguist, but definitely he is a cognitive scientist. Sort of different one, okay? Paying a lot of attention to math and computation, okay? But I tend to think that many of the concerns of Judah have been driven by the desire to understand how the human mind works. So I'll talk mostly about the time that I was with Judah, especially during the 80s. So yeah, in the 80s was a bit a scientific slippery subject, I would say. There was a time that there were these two big camps in AI, the Scruffies, writing programs and having very impressive demonstrations. The needs, okay, develop ever new formalism and proving impressive theorems, okay. I tend to think that Judah liked both and was impressed by both, but I think he didn't feel well in either camp. And I tend to think it has probably to do with the reason about this problem that, in a sense, those working, let's say, in the more programming-oriented AI at that time, so they didn't care so much about the generality, while the more formal people didn't care enough about computability. Okay, so if there is something that's been a characteristic of Judah, okay, in these 30 years or more, is that Judah was always concerned both with generality and not only computability, but I will say, and I will come back to this point many times, about tractability. Okay, so the way that the human mind does things, okay, should be understood in terms of tractable models. So the idea that inference should be, or at the core, or should be, one should be able to approximate inference in polynomial algorithms has been, I think, a common element, okay, in a lot of Judah's work. Actually, if I have to, in some sense, to take the three main ingredients, okay, I'll come back to these points later, is Judah, on the one hand, was very intuitive, okay, so he was always with very crisp examples in his mind, okay, in some sense, the models that he was developing was supposed to account for the behavior of these examples. I remember from that time examples like Rubik's Cube, by examples coming from the work of people in connectionist networks, okay, that come later, but the examples were existed already about context effects, understanding letters, so when you corrupt letters and you're supposed to read them and you corrupt that with noise, so that people are very, very resilient, okay, so understanding is very robust. So on the one hand, so very clear examples to work on, well-founded tools coming from probability and complexity theory, and this idea that you're supposed to account for that by working with models that you can compute with in a more or less an efficient way. I'll come back to this later. Basically, the two problems, okay, that Judah worked in the 70s and 80s, and I will not be saying much about causality because it's work that Judah did after I left, so I never learned that enough. So I leave that for Chris, who's going to be one of the three speakers in this part of the program. So the two problems that Judah was mainly concerned at that time was how to solve problems, okay, so this led to the book on heuristics, and how to reason with uncertain knowledge, okay, how to be able to reason in a robust way with uncertain knowledge, that eventually led to the probabilistic reasoning book in 88. So if you look at the actual publication dates of these two books, it's not that far apart, and that was the time when I was here at UCLA, so I was from 84 to 89 with Judah, so I know this period very well. So, and in principle, the two areas and the two type of problems appear related, okay, but there are some common threads, okay? Maybe, I mean, Judah disagrees with you. You can disagree, okay? So we can have a little chat, and you can have a chance to take a revenge with this interpretation. This is an interpretation as a student, as fun. So first thing to notice is polya. Polya appears in both books, Okay, so in both books you have George Polya. So actually, the name of the books of George Polya are related to the name of these two books by Judea. So one is How to Solve It, when he was working on heuristics about human problem solving. So there is a couple of volumes called Mathematics and Possible Reasoning. Okay, it is also related. Okay, and Judea devotes a section of the book on probabilistic reasoning to some of the claims, okay, that Polya made. The second element that is common is graphs, okay? So as Miller said before, so Judah always liked graphs, the idea of accounting for patterns of reasoning in terms of paths, okay? So they have searching paths or reasoning with paths, so are both. And then the notion of tractability, okay, that appears in both books. I would say the prominent place in the heuristics book, because the idea of where the heuristics are coming from, okay, so the idea is by solving tractable relaxations of problems, okay, and actually it's an idea that was there that is now a mainstream idea, as Rich mentioned before, in classical planning research, okay. And the other thing is to keep in mind, again, that follows from previous talks, is that the first Bayesian networks, okay, were not general, they were trees, and still many of the algorithms that are used these days for general Bayesian networks are based on the ideas that were derived from trees. So the idea that you have to focus, okay, both on well-founded tools, okay, probability, complexity, and so on, and focus on having tractable computational models. So the will play, I think, a role in both cases. It's something that relates. I'm not going, so again, I'm talking from the perspective of a student and a fan, so I'm not going to devote too much time to the impact that Judah had in the probabilistic world and in probabilistic AI. So actually, if you look at the book, you're going to find that in the preface, and I think that you're going to hear that from the other speakers. Enough to say that these days you can find Bayesian networks everywhere. Maybe you open the microwave and you have a Bayesian network that is doing some sensing there. There is a mainstream approach to AI, okay, it is probabilistic AI, so probabilities are everywhere, and then Judah is known and recognized to be the father of that, so the work is highly cited, used and recognized, so a few very awards, okay, among the many more that Judah got, but again, so it's something that Bayesian networks, okay, are these days are used and mentioned everywhere. Actually, I'm teaching now an AI class, and the students have to present some papers this week, so Monday, and they have to select a topic. It was not that specific about Bayesian networks, and one chose a topic about the use of Bayesian networks in reforestation. Okay, another of Bayesian networks for social networks, another Bayesian network for something else. Okay, so it's used everywhere. This does not mean, and I think we have to give credit, that Judah had to work hard to get good examples in his book. Okay, so if he had known about all these applications, okay, we will see different examples. But the students of Judah at that time, so we have to live with Holmes and Watson and give us testimony and this tasteless practical joker. Okay, that is an example I still use. So this is an example from the book for those not familiar with the book. So this is the Gibbons testimony and Watson testimony. So all those that took AI classes with Judah, those that use the books for teaching. So I'm sure that they know this example very well. That it's completely unrelated to the type of examples and applications that you see where Bayesian networks are used today. Actually, there is a more interesting example in the book. Okay, I'll read it. It's an example about the explaining graphical models, undirected graphical Markov networks. It says, as an example, consider, so it's page 99 from the book, consider a group of two males, M1 and M2, and two females, F1 and F2, who occasionally engage in pairwise heterosexual activities. Okay, so I mean, Judah had to work hard, okay, for the examples. At least I tend to think that there was a movie at that time provided the idea. I remember Bob Carroll TED Analysis, for those who are old enough to remember the movie. And Judah had this, the idea was a fixed idea. The fixed idea was graphs, okay? So, and he used it here. So these days I would say that the influence of Judah extends well beyond probabilistic AI into a whole research agenda. Okay, actually, many of us are not really working into, have not been working in graphical models. Okay, for the last few years, but you see the presence of Judea in this agenda that is, I would say, a driving force in mainstream artificial intelligence, okay, in the work done basic networks, constraint satisfaction problems, SAT, planning, MDPs, POMDPs, all different sort of models where people are interested about having general models where they can work on solvers, okay? So if you look a little bit about what are the main ideas for people working on these different areas, okay, all concerned about having models and solvers for those models, what you see is that neither you get general programs from programs themselves or from theories, that these general algorithms are coming from mathematical models. Each mathematical model is an abstraction of an infinite collection of problems. All these models, all the models that we care about in AI are computationally intractable. Everything that we care about is computationally intractable, so any blind method will not work, will not scale up. The main challenge in all these settings is computational, is how to scale up. For scaling up, the key issue is that the structure of the problems have to be recognized and exploited. Okay, and these are ideas that apply in all these models. And last but not least, okay, that the easy problems, that is, the tractable relaxations, can be a source of effective approximation schemes. Okay, so in all these cases. Okay, actually, I'm going to jump. I was going to talk about. I have 10 minutes. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about this too. Okay, as an example about the influence and the presence of Judea outside of the work of probabilistic AI, okay, things that we did in the 70s, early 80s that are, I would say, our main tools today, is in the area of planning. Okay, planning is concerned about a set of models that have the following form. So you have a set of variables. These variables can take a set of values, okay, normally discrete set of values. There it is an initial state where all the variables have certain values, and the goal is to reach another state where certain variables have different values, and you move from one state to another state by applying actions, okay? Each action is characterized by saying which are the variables that change when you do an action, and you're supposed to find what is the action sequence to drive the system from some initial state to a particular goal state. So that is the task in planning, and this problem is intractable. That is checking whether a planning exists in a problem, okay, of size bounded by a constant, is NP hard, and still it's a problem that people can solve rather easily, okay. And if you look, so this is an example of a problem. So this is a very old blocks world from AI. So you have the variables here are the position of some blocks, and you're supposed to go from a state where blocks are at certain positions to a state where blocks are at a different position. Okay, so even an extremely simple problem like having n blocks and going from one configuration to a target configuration, so the number of states that you get in the graph is exponential in the number of blocks. So given even an extremely simple problem like this with n blocks, you're going to have a graph with 2 to the n nodes. And the question is how to search for paths that connects the initial state to the goal states. That's what the planning problem becomes, a problem of pathfinding in this exponentially size problem. Okay, how is this problem? So this problem has been from the beginning in AI. So even one of the first AI programs from the 50s called GPS, General Problem Solver, was a problem that was targeting this type of problems. Okay, however, so the techniques that are used today and in the last 10 years are intimately related with ideas that Judea worked, okay, in the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. So how these problems are solved these days, okay, with heuristic functions, heuristic values that provide a sense of direction in the search. So now every node is going to have a number that provides an estimate of the cost to go from there to the goal. How these numbers are computed? These numbers are computed in polynomial time from a relaxation of the original problem. Okay, an idea that was considered explicitly in his book Heuristics, but is now a mainstream idea in AI in the last 10 years. Actually, the number of ideas interesting related to this, for instance, the fact that you don't even have to evaluate all the actions in all the states, but by having access to the computation of the heuristics, you know which are the actions that are most relevant, and you can afford just to evaluate those actions in order to reach. In this case, with the values that you get, you can go straight to the goal, okay, just bypassing any need to search. And this is something, again, so I'm saying, so these ideas that you're working on, okay, have an impact that do well beyond the work in probabilistic AI and last few years in causality. Okay, let me go back to Judea now. If you go to Judea's office, okay, don't look for a sign saying this Professor Pearl's office. You are not going to find it. Okay, this is the door of Judea's office. Okay, actually it's not visible from here, but we can get closer. Okay, and what you see is rather than having the name of Judea, okay, Professor Pearl's office, what you have is a sign from, I think, from the fire department, and then what you have is another sign that says, "Experiments in progress, do not knock." Okay. Judea appreciates a lot of having no noise. Actually, if you knock, there is a chance that he may not hear because sometimes he's wearing earplugs. Okay, so actually for students, the earplugs were pretty good because we learned that when he took off the earplugs, is that probably said something interesting. Okay, so a clear and immediate feedback. The problem is that he may not listen when you knock at the door. So now go back to Judah. So what I would say is that Judah, if the experiments are still in progress, we are quite happy about that, but you can rest assured that the results, okay, that you have obtained so far have been incredibly good. And I will say a couple of more things. Okay, one, on a personal note is, okay, so actually at Dan Arena, I just use all the right words, so I just want to thank you. Personally, I tend to think that on behalf of all of your students, okay, for the fortune and privilege to have learned from your example in life and in science, and from your generosity, your passion, and your wisdom. Just one more thing is, today is a day of celebration, okay? While we are not going to be saying much about Danny's tragedy, okay, so rest assured that it's something that is in everyone's mind, and we know what he has meant for you and the family as well. Okay.